Greetings, everyone. I see that people are joining the session. It's my great pleasure to be the moderator for this, the 58th Yale Career Panel, A Candid View of Professions. Um, I am very pleased about it because this is an important profession and one which many Yaleys end up going into. And so our hope is that you come out of this 1 hour session feeling like you learned a lot more, the pluses and the minuses, a candid view, so that you go in with your eyes open and enthusiastic for the right reasons. This whole program started, I believe, around 11 years ago. And when a group of us who recruit from Yale, I mean, I run an investment bank and recruit, realized that although Yale gives the students really an excellent education, that there was kind of a gap in the sense that people didn't have, a full set of candid information about different professions. It's not the fault of the school, but there are a lot of myths and things such as, in the medical profession, there's so many TV shows about being a doctor. I think it's hard to count them all between House and Chicago MD, et cetera. But the key is what part of that is really accurate and not accurate. So we've set these up with the idea of doing a couple in the areas where there's the greatest mythology, and we had so many people sign up, we just kept on going. So for those of you in the audience, there are a couple things you need to know. First of all, this is an hour long for the panel, but we're going to make sure there's at least 10 minutes or so at the end for Q&A. And the way you ask questions is you just either raise your hand or type in your question in the Q&A chat box, and all of us are going to be able to see your questions, and we'll answer as many as we can. The the other thing I want to mention is that after the hour, there'll be sort of an optional networking session. We're using a very interesting technology in that once we finish the active stage panel, and we will move all of you into a lounge, and you just click on, there's a little thing called join fluid space, and you join that. And when you do that, all of us are going to be in kind of a cocktail party with a little round circle with our faces so that people can see you talking. And you move around in the space with your arrow keys or your mouse. And if you want to know what someone is doing, you just put your mouse over their face, and it'll show you their name and who they are, their affiliation, and so forth. The other unique part about it is that as you move closer to someone, you hear their voice is louder. As you move away, the voice is softer. So you move around and you can get together in groups. And all of the panelists have agreed that they're going to hang out in the fluid space afterwards for a period of time, and we'll do the whole thing for half an hour. And we hope that that'll be a way for you to meet some of the panelists, but also meet each other and perhaps find some friends that otherwise you wouldn't have. So with that, I'm just going to say that we're going to go through 6 questions. The questions that we're going to go through are on the invitation, so you can see what they are as the attendees. And we're very pleased to have 3 really excellent panelists. In order of alphabetical by last name, we have Alan Astro, who is an MD, and he's the chief of the Division of Hematology and Medical Oncology at the New York Presbyterian Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. And he's a proud graduate of Trumbull College, 1976, and Yale Medical School. The second is Rushad Doherty, who's an MD, and he is a senior analyst in Deep Track Capital at Deep Track Capital. So he is partially out of the medical profession, but he's also an internal medicine physician at NYU Langone Hospital, Bellevue Hospital. And last but not least is Kathy May Tran, who's an MD, and she's an attending hospitalist physician at Mass General Hospital, but she's also active in terms of publishing as the associate editor of Case Records, New York Journal of Medicine, and associate director of practice of medicine, ICS at the Harvard Medical School, and she is a TD 2009. So we have a bunch of Yale graduates here, which don't hold that against them, but they are a nice, diverse group of people in terms of what part of the medical profession they're in, and so forth. So I'm very pleased to have them as panelists. So I think let's start out because with the first question, which is, where do you see the profession heading, both good and bad? And the reason why we ask this is if you look at the medical profession, uh, it really has changed over time. Many years ago, the doctors had their individual practices, so forth, saw patients. Over time, that has changed. In many, many years ago, there were more generalists than specialists, but that's changed also as more people, more doctors have specialized and so forth. But what I'd really like to do is to have the panelists each talk about where they see the changes happening, good or bad, and but look beyond the next couple of years, because those of you who might go to medical school, by the time you are a doctor, it's not going to be in a year or two. It'll be a couple of years out. So it's important to know what it may look like when you become a doctor. So let me just open up. And by the way, panelists, there's no particular order. You can talk as much or as little as you wish, and in what order. So which of the panelists would like to speak first?
I guess I'll go.
Go
So,
ahead, Kathy.
where's the profession heading, good and bad? Well, I think that the field of medicine is changing a lot because now medicine is much more of an accessible field. I think people are more aware of their health because of health literacy, and then also because of access to care. Of course, access to care is a huge issue that we're facing, but now medicine is very, very specialized. You have three physicians here who work at academic centers. So we're not getting a lot of the rural health viewpoint and a lot of the community health viewpoint here. But in academic medicine, everything is extremely specialized. I work in hospital medicine, which in and of itself did not exist, 20 years ago. So one of the largest growing specialties is also one of the newest ones. People develop in academic medicine very niche specialties, very niche interests. So that's the movement away from general medicine. At the same time, I think that well-being is something that we're always thinking about now. And so doctors don't necessarily have to work night and day and all hours. People are considering family life, quality of life, retiring at a reasonable age, being happy and fulfilled. And so I think that those are some of the goods. The culture is still changing. I think medicine is still a really tough field to enter and a tough field to work in. And so you should be very well aware of what you're entering. But I do think that the culture is changing. Um, in terms of the bads, I mean, I think everything I said has a other side to it too. But in terms of some of the bads, if you're interested in becoming a doctor, I think that we have incredible employment protection. I think that everyone is always thinking about their health as number one, and everyone will always need doctors. But the role of a doctor is changing. Now we have advanced practice providers. We have many wings to medicine. So I don't think that a doctor's doctor, like one kind of doctor, fits all anymore. So I think that the role of physicians in medicine is changing because of the other multidisciplines that are involved. That's not a bad thing, though. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it makes the field more rich and it provides better care for the patients.
Great. In reverse alphabetical order by last name. So Rashad, you're next.
Sure. So I kind of jotted down three things for this question. I think number one, culturally, there's a movement away in medical education and in the profession. Um, I think a movement away from valuing like rote memorization and valuing people who have critical thinking skills and can sort of like evaluate a patient like holistically and connect dots that are disparate and sort of coherently synthesize different data points. I look back on what it was like even when I was a first year medical student. So that was 2012. And I look at kind of how some of the medical students that I interact with at the hospital now describe their curriculum. And even in kind of the span of less than a decade, whereas I was forced to spend hours in the library kind of like memorizing the Krebs cycle, these kids are like refusing to do it even. Like step one, when I took it, like it was all about what score did you get? Was it a 240 or a 230 or a 260? And now it's pass fail. And so I do think there's just a movement towards valuing people who know how to think rather than people who are just kind of memorizing facts and spitting them back out. And some of that is also because, not just in medicine, but across all industries, like information, like access to information is becoming increasingly commoditized. So it's easy to just look up what a disease is and what its symptoms often are, but to be able to see a patient in front of you and evaluate that person and use judgment, that's not something you can access on your phone. So that's one thing. The second point I wanted to make is that I do feel like, particularly in urban areas, there's been an intense movement towards like subspecialized care. Generally speaking, I feel like a lot of care is being done by people who are subspecialists, and it's the role of people who are in like my position and Kathy's position as hospitalists to kind of like manage the patient through different steps where they're kind of getting seen by different folks on the subspecialty side. And some of that's just, again, like in the urban centers, just a function of availability of so many physicians. Like if you have a dozen cardiologists on staff, you probably don't want your heart problem seen by a generalist if you have a cardiologist who has excess capacity. And then I think related to that is, and I think something, Peter, you touched on this, we're seeing less and less of kind of the physician who graduates residency and sort of puts up a shingle on the side of the road and that's his or her practice. I think a lot of medicine is sort of moving into multi-specialty, multidiscipline care, like hospital centers. And I think there's a number of driving forces for that, which maybe we can talk about for a further question. But I think over the next 10 years or so, I feel like this trend is going to keep moving forward.
That's very, very helpful. Very interesting. Alan, and you, what do you think the trends will be, good and bad?
Okay, so let me start by one thing I didn't mention to you, Peter, is I also teach as an adjunct Jewish medical ethics at the Jewish Theological Seminary, where I teach some rabbinical students and also Columbia undergraduates. So I just pulled down from the book of Ecclesiastes, there's a saying, it's Ecclesiastes 7:10. Do not say, how was it that the older days were better than these? Because this is not a smart thing to say. And so there is a tendency, which has gone on for thousands of years, for people who are older to think that the world is going to hell in a basket. That's what tends to happen as we get older. And I like Rashad and Kathy's very balanced assessment of where things are. I graduated from medical school in 1980. I graduated from Yale in 1976. So, I have seen quite a bit. Um, when I was a medical student, AIDS didn't exist as an illness. Um, and even now, for some of the younger doctors, and since I was doing my training as a hematology fellow during the heart of the AIDS epidemic, the younger doctors have no clue what went on then. And now, we have all this COVID epidemic that's kind of come up out of nowhere. So there are always a lot of surprises in medicine and healthcare, and it's one of the challenges of being in the field. I would say that the essence of being a doctor has not changed. The essence of being a doctor is the face-to-face relationship with another human being who you are trying to help. Now, there are many different aspects to being a doctor. In some areas in medicine, you have less patient contact. You can be a pathologist, for example, and you spend all your day looking at slides. You can see a radiologist where you spend a lot of your time looking at x-rays, although radiologists do have a lot of patient care contact as well. But you can be an anesthesiologist where usually your patients are asleep. So there are a lot of different aspects to being a doctor, and it's a big country. So all three of us on this panel have practiced in the Northeast of the United States, and we're all employed by institutions. Now, that has been a growing tendency in medicine since I first, finished my training. My first job, I was working for private practice, and fewer doctors in major urban centers are working in private practices. More and more are being employed by hospitals or other big institutions. Although in other parts of the country, there's still plenty of doctors in private practice, and it depends where you want to go. I think if there's a need for doctors all over the country, and your experience will depend partly on where you want to live and where you want to be.
But part of the issue, though, and the reason why the trend away from independent doctors is all the regulation and insurance things and so forth just make it very hard for someone who has their own individual. So it's not some technical reason. It's a practical reason, and that's why a lot of doctors end up working for hospitals or group practices where they can share the pain of all of the insurance and regulatory things. And it's not because doctors don't want to work in their own offices. A lot of it's being driven by other things.
Yes, medicine is a highly regulated field. Where if you're a lawyer, I mean, you have to follow rules and laws, but if you have a legal practice, no one's going to be looking over your legal notes unless you are accused of malpractice or something like that. It's much different. It's not medicine is a public service. Not saying that law and other fields don't have a public service component to them, but law, for example, it's highly commercial. Medicine, you're dealing with the public. You're trying to help the average citizen, and it's that sort of field. So as a result, because the public has an interest in making sure that medical services are widely available, the government is going to put restrictions on what doctors can charge and all kinds of and they want to make sure that what we're doing is safe. And there's been a lot more of that during my career. It's much more heavily regulated than it was. Some doctors find that very irritating. That we have to answer to administrators and other non-medical people. And if you're going to be very frustrated by that, then you wouldn't want to work for a big institution because that's where things are going there. So I'd say that it's becoming, that medicine is more, I agree, more highly specialized, more teamwork, more you're working with NPs and PAs. You got hospitalists, you have whole other areas of medicine that have opened up. But I still think the essence of being a doctor, service to others, service to humankind, one-to-one relationships with people, one-to-one relationships with people from a whole host of backgrounds, rich, poor, every single different ethnic group, that has not changed. And I think it's not likely going to change. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the best part of medicine, and it's the good part of medicine. All the other stuff
Related to this question, then, sorry to cut you off, but
Yeah.
we got to get to the other questions.
Yes.
Related to this, obviously, is the next question, which is every profession that I know of has myths and realities, right?
Mhm.
And I think medical is no different from that. And of course, it's even more accelerated by the fact that there are all these TV shows, right? And I've been told by doctors that they don't solve medical problems every 5 minutes, although that's what they try to do. So tell me, what do you see as the myths and realities that are relevant to someone who is thinking about being a doctor? We'll start with you, Kathy.
Sure. I think in terms of the realities, I want to reiterate something that Alan said is that medicine is a field of good. I have a lot of friends who are who work in different fields, some creative, some professional, some academic, all kinds of things. And one thing that sets our field apart, medicine, is I never have to justify the good that I'm doing. Like intrinsically being a doctor is a good thing, regardless of what happens during the day, the outcomes of your patients, what you've researched, then I can always go home and realize that what puts food on the table for me and pays for a roof above my head is also doing good for the community. And that's really, really amazing. Even if someone is doing, I don't know, uh, plastic surgery like on Park Avenue or whatever, they can still say that, oh, like I'm doing good in my work. I'm helping people. Or if you're at Bellevue, like Rashad, and you're taking care of people who have just landed in the States, you can always feel like you're doing good. So that's a true reality. And when times are tough and I'm tired, I can always go home and say that I'm doing really well. Another one myth that I might want to point out about medicine is that it is a super tough field to get into. I think that if you want to be a doctor, if you put in the work, you will be able to do this. And one really great thing about medicine right now is I'm on the panels at HMS and here at MGH to bring in new medical students and new residents. And what really matters to us is the individual and their beliefs and who they are and what they bring to the table. And things like test scores and grades are, of course, really important because we want to make sure that a person is competent enough to do the job. But it's also about, who you are and what you want to contribute to the field. Once you're in medical school, we also have a really big advantage is you kind of got it made. Like every year there are spots in residency that go unmatched, but oftentimes these are just because of undesirable locations or programs or something like that. But if you make it to medical school, there are very high chances that you'll make it into residency and you'll make it into fellowship. And I'm not going to lie that the whole process isn't really, 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 really difficult. But compared to other fields where you have to find your own way and take circuitous and non-traditional paths in medicine, once you're on the train tracks, you'll have small decisions along the way, but eventually you'll make it to the destination that you're hoping for.
Okay, Rashad, myths and realities.
Yeah. The one reality I wanted to cite, I think Kathy and Alan covered it well, which is that I do feel like what's special about the profession and certainly what is true today and what I imagine will be true over the next 10, 20 years onward are the relationships you get to make with your patients and the sense of fulfillment that you get when working with them. I think a lot of people sort of expect that kind of going into it, and that's something that I think you'll find if you do, it is true. The myths, I guess I'll just list a few of them. One is that I think some people imagine medicine to be like a 90-hour-a-week grind for the rest of your life. I don't really think that's completely true anymore. I think there are some institutions and some specialties that still have that, but there's a diversity of opportunities available, again, both across institutions, geographies, and specialties, where you can sort of fit the lifestyle according to your preferences and kind of what works for your family. Um, I think Kathy made a very good point about it sort of, it's not that it's not tough to get into. It is tough to get into, but I do feel like when there's a will, there's a way. You can figure it out, even if the people at career services are telling you not to apply. Probably would not listen to them. You can probably figure it out if you're motivated enough. Grades matter up to a certain point, but if you have a convincing narrative that is true and makes sense, I think that goes a long way as well. And then lastly, one myth, I think we often go into medicine thinking, oh man, like I have to memorize and remember so much information. Like, how am I going to do that? It's not that that's not true and is a myth. That is true. But I think one of the advantages of medical training is that it's repetition based. You see so many different cases. Oftentimes they're very similar. Sometimes they're different. But over time, it's basically like you're learning a new language. So, after 10 years in the field, now I feel like I've sort of gotten close to more fluency with the language of medicine. And so what used to look very overwhelming to me now is just almost like second nature. It's like speaking English or something else. So I wouldn't feel so intimidated by it from that perspective.
So Rashad, I thought you were going to say it's become so easy now that we had Chat GPT, right?
Yeah, I haven't tried that one yet. Maybe if we do this in a year, I'll say that.
Yeah, actually, I will later on ask people what effect you think that AI might have on the medical profession, because it's a hot topic and it's an important topic. But I thought you were going to say it's a myth that House was really a nasty guy. He really was a nice guy, right? Alan, myths versus realities.
Well, okay. So first, it's not nonstop drama. Okay. So, yes, there are dramatic things that happen. The sudden medical catastrophes, or someone comes in with some surprising finding. There are dramas, but I think, as Rashad said, a lot of the things you do them repeatedly. Got constantly people about hypertension, or if you, particularly with medicine being more subspecialized, I see a lot of women with breast cancer. So a lot of the conversations I have, since I've done them before, I'm going over the same material over and over again. So it's not nonstop drama. I would say that it's not always like a highly intellectual experience. If you're looking for that, it's not like a college professor or something like that. Well, I'm not sure being a college professor is a highly intellectual experience anymore either. So, but a lot of it is just explaining things to people, to ordinary people. So when you said that you finally learned the language of medicine, I'm not sure if that's good or bad, because what happens is we doctors have this lingo which basically takes everyday experiences and turns them into this appalling jargon. I remember my first week in medical school, I heard a professor talked about an erythematous pharynx. I had no idea what he was talking about. Oh, it's a sore throat, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's one of the dangers of being a doctor, that we do tend to sometimes retreat into our own little universes of other doctors and other people in healthcare fields, and you can lose track of the experiences of the average person, because one of your main things you have to do as a doctor is explain medical experiences, things that people are experiencing in their bodies, to others in a way that they can understand them. You have to connect with other people. That's one of the key aspects of being a doctor.
Yeah. I'm going to deviate from the sixth question and ask Kathy a question, which is being a woman. We've been through a number of these panels on medical every couple of years, because it's a popular profession. And we've had women who are doctors. And I've asked this question, which is how, for those of the people who are watching who are female, what are the differences and what are the things that you have to take into consideration, good, bad, and ugly, for being a woman? Because, men and women are not exactly the same. You can't bear a child if you're male, as far as I know, at least today. So could you comment about, if you're a woman and think about being a doctor and going to medical school, what are the things that you have to consider, good, bad, and ugly?
Peter, thanks for asking that. I particularly have an interest in this because I do a lot of women in medicine advocacy around HMS and MGH. Over half of the medical students that matriculate now, over 50%, are women, which is very, very exciting, meaning that, as with many fields, women are taking over, and I like that a lot. I also want to point out that there are specialties that have more or less women in their footprint. Surgical fields tend to have fewer, and outpatient fields tend to have more, and then fields in between are very variable. And those are trends that fortunately are changing, but that's the way that it stands right now. Being a woman should never be a barrier to going into medical school, though we do have to be aware of the biological timelines of women and men. And so for a woman who is deciding to go into medical school or into training, then at the age in which childbearing happens, I think is the biggest consideration. And now, because we had all talked about this earlier about how well-being is more emphasized in medicine now, fortunately, institutions are more supportive of trainees having families while they're studying or training. They're having more support for women who have young children or need childcare and who need maternal leave. That being said, it is still really, 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 really tough, depending on the institutions and depending on the field. Oftentimes women will find that they don't have a lot of support. I fortunately am at an institution that tries to be mindful of it. A lot of work still to be done, but we are trying to be mindful and make strides to achieve true equity between people who identify as women and as men. So that is one practical consideration that women may need to have as they enter medicine, but it should not be a barrier for someone who is thinking about medicine. In terms of career choices, specialty choices, again, I don't think that being a woman should hinder any person from entering a certain field. If anything, then women who are on the field, women in a certain field within medicine, are very, very supportive of mentoring each other. We try to lift up each other. We try to watch out for each other. So as with all careers, not just medicine, but within medicine, you find your own people, you find your own mentors. I would highly encourage any people who identify as women going into the field to try to find their birds to flock along with too, and make sure that you learn from them. But being a woman is you can be just as or a better doctor if you're a woman. Studies have shown that women, inpatient physicians, if a patient is under the care of a woman, they have a shorter length of stay. And people who have women primary care physicians oftentimes have an extended lifespan. So there's really great things that we bring to the field.
Great. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Hey, Peter, I see some comments in the chat. They're interesting. Do you want to take them, any of those on? What do you think?
I'm sorry?
I see some comments in the chat. that are interesting.
We're not in the Q&A session yet, Alan.
Okay.
So we'll do that. Okay.
Okay.
So the next question is the following. As much as people try very hard to figure out whether they're a good fit with the profession, they really only know until they enter it. And this is true of every profession. So I'm in investment banking, and I got to tell you that people who go into investment banking, in the first couple of years, people kind of sort out whether they're good at it or they have the right temperament and so forth. I mean, I'll give an example. In most areas of investment banking, you have to juggle, multitask and juggle, 8, 9 things at the same time. And not everyone can do that personally. They may not have that aspect to their skill set or personality. So I guess the question is this. Unfortunately, the three of you have been, doctors for a while. Can you point out some of the characteristics of people who tend to do well and are happy, but then the opposite, which is what are the kind of traits that maybe cause people not to do well or not to be happy? And by the way, those two aren't moved together. I mean, it's possible someone's a great doctor, but it's not happy, right? So maybe if you could point that out, because I think part of what we're trying to do here is get the audience to self-assess, right? And so that they can say, oh, okay, I don't think I have that, or whatever it may be. So again, what kind of people in your experience have tended to do well, but also which ones end up happy or unhappy? So any order, you can, anyone who wants to address this first, welcome to speak.
Well, I would say you have to have a certain tolerance for frustration, right? Because there is certainly a lot of frustration in medicine, and yes, dealing with administrators can be very, very irritating, and also patients often they don't listen to what you recommend. I'd say more often than not, the people just you suggest things to people and they don't do what you think they ought to do. So you can't get too frustrated with other people, or sometimes family members can be really hard on doctors because they're dealing with a lot of stress and they take it out on us. So if you can't handle that, that's going to be hard for you. You also have to be willing to work when you're tired sometimes. I'm tired an awful lot in this. I must have to admit it. It's hard work being a doctor. So you have to be willing to work hard. And I also think that if you feel like you're entitled to be happy, I don't think that's not a good approach. I don't think, in general. If you have a strong sense of entitlement, why isn't the world treating me better than I think? Why doesn't everyone realize I'm brilliant? Why aren't people treating me better? Well, I think in general, in whatever field you're going to be in, I think you'll have a hard time. But I think in medicine, it's such a human field, and you're dealing with such complex issues that you have to be able to roll with things a certain amount. That's what I'd say.
Okay. Rashad or Kathy, any comment?
I think that the people who tend to do well are the people who want to do it. I think that a lot of people from, who are, very smart, capable people, medicine is always very attractive because, again, it's a field that you jump into and you kind of go autopilot. It's a great field. You're well respected. You do good things. It's challenging. So there's a lot of great things about medicine, but especially from Yale, I think our community, a lot of people think they should, so then they do it, and that's not the right thing to do. You shouldn't go into medicine because you can do it. You should go into medicine because you want to do it. This is not something that you kind of do on the side. It's a huge investment of time, money, but mostly I think the emotional aspect is you're devoting your person to this field. It's not just your career. it becomes who you are. I think that doctors, many fields are like this, but doctors truly have a personal identity as a doctor. It's not just that I do this as my job. It is who I am, and I think that probably most doctors would feel similarly to how I do. So it's not a field for someone who can do it. It's a field for someone who wants to do it. And I like what Rashad said earlier, if there is a will, there's a way. The people who I guess that answers kind of both parts, who does well and who doesn't. In terms of the happiness part, I think that happiness is what you make out of it. Careers can be fulfilling for many reasons, and fortunately, the field of medicine is so diverse that we have all kinds of people. We have people who only want to do global health in Haiti and never publish a paper, and that's totally fine. We have people who want to be like top researchers at the top at NIAID, and that's totally fine. We have doctors who want to be public speakers or television show host or whatever it may be. So the field is incredibly broad, and you can kind of make it what you want it to be. I think that Rashad and I are both examples of that. Who we do a lot of things that are not medicine in our jobs.
Can I just jump
Yeah,
in?
and I think Rashad is a good example of someone who's doing medicine but something else. And I think my perception, and I'd like your reaction to it, my perception is that there are more diverse things that people end up doing after medical school. I mean, there are other professions where the design is it's a place where if you're not sure what you want to do, you do it. So a lot of people go to law school saying, well, it's a nice placeholder for me to figure out what I want to do, or business school. But I think medicine generally, people do it because they want to be a doctor. But that's kind of changing, and I think Rashad, you can probably comment on that because that's part of what has happened in your life, right?
Yeah, Peter. I think for me, I I think in my career, I started med school knowing that I wanted to be a physician, and that never changed. But I also knew that in addition to patient care, I wanted to be doing things in the industry of healthcare, in the industry of medicine, also outside of direct doctor-patient work. Um, I think to your question from earlier in terms of what makes people happy or what are those characteristics for people who are happy and those who are not, I think Kathy said it very well. I think you kind of need to go into it committed to the field and committed to the profession, and to always have that as your identity. Um, and so even for me, who spends his Monday to Friday working in finance, like I still, when someone asks me like, what do you do for work? The thing that pops into my head first is still that, oh, I'm a physician.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's kind of more my identity than the other thing. And I think even if something happened and I wasn't practicing for a year, if I got really busy in my Monday to Friday, I think I would still be that way. The other thing I wanted to say for this question is I think having being very patient, having intellectual curiosity, those two things go a long way. And they're very easy to say, but I can't think of the number of times where I was a resident on the internal medicine service and I would come home and I was exhausted, and just would go down on my bed and be asleep within minutes. And then I would like think to myself, like the next day, like, what did I do that afternoon? And it's hard for me to come up with like three tangible things I did. It's because I was like running around so much and there's like so much inefficiency. I would have to make 10 phone calls just to get a patient a bed. So I think people who often don't do well in medicine you get frustrated and burnt out are folks who just imagine that it would be like the intellectual Wild West, and they would be sitting on their computer and like diagnosing this and that and like cool patients every day. The day-to-day is really not like that. I think you kind of need to have what Alan described as like a tolerance for inefficiency, and combine that also with intellectual curiosity, because I think in those moments where you're chasing down the nurse to get your patient to bed for 2 hours, if you have intellectual curiosity, you find ways to keep yourself interested, keep yourself engaged day after day too. Those two, to me, are two big characteristics that I see in folks who do this career sustainably over time.
I want to make one comment. Normally, at the start of each of these career panels, I say the following. But I suddenly realized I should say it, and that is, all this advice that you're getting from Alan, Kathy, and Rashad, it doesn't. It's not helpful unless you really understand yourself and know what's important to you, not important to you, and because at the end of the day, it's a question of a match, right? What matches you personally, and I think that's a very important thing. And I personally have a story that relates to this panel. I started at Yale. I was a physics math major, and I was pre-med, and I really wanted to be a doctor. And at the end of my sophomore year, I had a internship at the Mayo Clinic, and basically you followed two doctors around for 3 months. And at the end, those two doctors sat me down and said, "Well, we'd love to chat with you because we wanted to share some views with you." Whenever somebody says that, you start to say, "Oh shit, that's something bad's about to happen." And they said, "Well, the good news is we've gotten to know you, and we think that your reasons for wanting to be a doctor are good ones. We think you technically, in terms of problem solving, you'd be a good fit. And I think you like being with people. We think you'd be a good doctor." I said, "Wow, that's really good news." And they said, "The bad news is we don't think you should be a doctor." So I said, "Well, please explain to me why after you said that." And they said, "We've gotten to know you in the 3 months, and you have a strong desire to control the environment around you. And the one thing we can tell you, and I think that's still true today, is there's so much where you're not in control, that's, your beeper goes off, this and that. So this is not a profession where if you have a strong desire to control exactly what you're doing every day, in a minute, it's a bad profession." So I switched, but it was probably one of the best advice, but it was the last thing I thought I would hear, right? That, you'd be a great doctor, but you shouldn't be, right? But it was good advice. So I would just recommend that, listen to what Alan and Rashad and Kathy have to say, but do a hard look at yourself and say, what do I like? Is money important to me? Is not money not important to me? Is, all these things, lifestyle, before you make that decision, because if it's not a good match, then, you shouldn't do it. I mean, does that make kind of sense to our three panelists? Because you've seen a lot of people for which maybe they did a bad job of self-assessment. Any comments?
Well, I would say that there are a lot of different types of people can be doctors. And just getting to know you a little, Peter, you sound like you've had a great career, but I think you might have been a fine doctor. I think these other people who are talking to you, I don't think they gave you good advice. I think, it's all what you want to do. I think that there's some people in medicine, there's some aspects of medicine where people are really controlling, and it's useful. Radiation, they kind of be very fussy about things. It's good that they're fussy in radiation. So I think there's just a lot of different personality types that, as long as you really want to be with sick people and help them, there are different types of people who can do it. And I have to tell you, I'm 68 years old. I'm still not totally sure who I am. You just, so I don't know. I'm reluctant to tell anyone what they should or shouldn't do. That's what I would say.
I think the big point of what Peter was sharing is you should know yourself. And I think that's really true. You should know yourself no matter what career you go into. But you should also know that no decisions are binding. So there are people who go into medicine and leave medicine. there are people who go into other fields and enter medicine, and there are people who go to medicine, leave, and then come back. I know all of those. I do a lot of work at the conservatory here in Boston, the New England Conservatory, and there's plenty of conservatory students who are entering medicine. And similarly, there are lots of, medical people who retire early and go into other fields, whereas it's, industry, creative writing, novelist. I think I have an assortment of experiences with people. So you should know yourself, and even if people give you great advice, you should get advice from as many people as you can. But no one knows you better than you. But even if who you are now is not who you are tomorrow, you can always change your mind. Um, uh, it doesn't mean that you should just go into medicine and then change your mind, because again, it is a big investment of sacrifices in your personal life, your professional life, in your financial status, things like that. So it's not a decision to be made lightly, but it's also not a final decision if you change your mind.
Now, Alan, I've looked at the chat box for the questions, and I see. Well, first of all, Kathy, you've answered some of the questions in the chat box. Boy, so clearly she's a multitasker, right?
Yes.
But it looks like there are one or two questions, so we won't need the whole time. But so my last question to you before I go to Stephen Ho's question, right, which is a good one, is if you don't stay as a doctor and retire with a gold watch as a doctor, and and then do whatever it is that you want to retire, what are some of the exit routes and that you think exist, but also what are the alternative careers? Because in some cases, people don't wait to retirement and try to do something else. They'd want to do something else. They go into administration or whatever it may be. So comment on what the alternative routes, career routes, and exit paths are for people who are in the medical profession.
I know people have gone into the pharmaceutical industry, and I know quite a few people have done that. And some people have gone into there's a big need for financial consulting, people who can understand medicine so that they can help people make investments. And is that, Rashad, do you do that part time? Is that, yeah, to understand enough about the science and help to figure out which new drugs might be useful or where things can be invested. People go into public health aspects of things. I know people who have do epidemiology or infection control or things of that sort. I know that people have gone to lab research. I know somebody went to medical school and got MD, PhD. He never did an internship. He's just became a laboratory scientist. He's a professor of biochemistry, chairman of a department. So yeah, but I would just agree with Kathy. It is it's a big time commitment. I sometimes feel I gave up the entire decade of my 20s to become a doctor. Where did that whole decade go? So it is a big deal if you decide you want to become a doctor. It is a long time commitment. But yeah, there are a lot of different paths you can take with medicine.
Rashad, you're uniquely positioned to talk about how people might go into finance or investing.
Yeah, it's honestly, Peter, it's a bit of a difficult question to answer because I don't think it really, being in medicine doesn't really close very many doors. And I guess the way that I would describe it is that if you go into medicine and develop some sort of expertise in taking care of patients by virtue of your clinical training, you're positioned to have a strong viewpoint, I think, on matters across the healthcare industry, which is 25% of US GDP, like one sort of way to think about it, right? And so across 20% of the US economy, you have a skill set that kind of puts you in the conversation at the very least. And so whether or not that's kind of doing what I do in venture capital or at a pharmaceutical company or in public health or whatever it is, I don't think that door is is close to you, and that's why I also think I agree with Alan, Peter. I feel like you got bad advice when you were kind of
Oh boy, it's too
into
late. It's too late. It's too late for me now.
Never too late, Peter.
The reason being that it is, I think, very hard to generalize like who would be a good physician, and to me, I think all you really need to be sure of is that the doctor-patient interaction is something that is very important and like very special to you. If that's true, you can kind of figure the rest of it out. But if you're not sure about that, uh, I would spend more time on that point. Because the field itself is broad enough that as long as you have that, whatever the idiosyncrasies of your personality are outside of that, you can kind of find a niche that'll work for you. Like there are pathologists who like barely talk to people all day. They just read slides all day. And then there are other folks, like Kathy, who are like just talking to people all day, talking to patients, talking to nurses, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, and she's so bashful. I'm sure it's really a challenge for her, right?
So I feel, you can kind of figure it out. And there's a lot of opportunities that will be open to you as well, outside of just being outside of just the doctor-patient interaction too.
By the way, I am going to just give one example that is good for this question. My firm, I run an investment bank. I was at Lehman and Solomon, but then I'm running an investment bank that focuses on life sciences and chemicals. So we do a lot of work. We have a lot of interaction with, with drugs and pharmaceutical companies, et cetera. But I'll point one example of this answer to this question, an extreme one, of one of my senior members of the firm. His name is Dr. Steven Spielberg. And oh, by the way, he didn't direct E.T., by the way, that was his cousin. But he started out as a doctor, a pediatric doctor. And then he became the dean of Dartmouth Medical School for 10 years. And then he became the head of all pediatric drug research for J&J, the pharmaceutical company. And then he became deputy commissioner of the FDA, which is responsible for all drugs and medical products, which is 80% of the FDA. And then he joined Young & Partners in investment bank. So, he's an example of, it's amazing what you can do if you have medical and scientific skills, right? I wouldn't recommend having that many careers, but he's really good and he's been at the top of each of those. But it's just an example, really, of the question, which is those skills apply to lots of different professions, right? So, Kathy, any comment on that last question about, what you can do?
Yeah, so I think that medicine, I can't stress enough, is so diverse. Medical school gives you a very unique skill set, and you are a very desired, you're a very valued and desired skill set. We've talked about a lot of peri-science fields that one can go into, but then also there's other things too. I do a lot of writing and editing. I'm gonna tomorrow do a presentation of King Lear here in the hospital, and we're going to do like a reading of King Lear and have a community discussion on end of life decisions and family values and ways of communication based on King Lear in the hospital setting. And the person who I'm co-directing, she's a physician and now full-time she's a writer in residence. I know people who do a lot of music and medicine. So, one of the pediatricians who I work with, she is, kind of sundowning her clinical time and spending more of it playing in, chamber music and helping with, neurological, assessments of how music might affect the brain. I do a lot of writing and editing. So it's possible that eventually at some point in my career, I will not see patients anymore. And then I'll shift more towards just doing that writing. And of course, there's always teaching too. Teaching is a huge part of getting to be a doctor, is a huge part of being a doctor. And if one isn't interested in clinical care anymore, or interested in contributing to clinical care in a different way, teaching is always an option too. Really, I think that medicine, again, why it's a desire, a field that a lot of people go into, is you can make it what you want it to be, even after even after the medical part ends, even after the direct patient care part ends.
So there are like 3 or 4 questions. Some of them are not really related to careers. Like one is, how do you revamp the healthcare system? I don't think that's a career. That's a different topic. But there is one. Stephen Ho asks, what age is too old to go to medical school? And so that's a relevant question. So, any comment from our panelists here?
Well, you got to think about it. You got medical school is 4 years, right? Then you usually got to do a residency, so that's another 3 years, 7 years. And a lot of times you might do some other training too. So it's going to be 7 to 10 years of training. So yeah, could you do it at age 30? Yes, I think you could. Can you do it at age 40? Could you decide you want to go to medical school at age 40? Well, I mean, you might not be able to practice until you're like late 40s, 50. But, people are living longer. And if you're healthy, if you have your health, if a medical school will take you, medical schools may feel, well, they want to have someone who is going to be in the field longer. But I would say 40, I think 40 would be about it. I don't know. What do you guys think? Rashad, Kathy, I'd say about 40.
I answered this a little bit in the chat, but I think that this is another answer of you know you best. Technically, there's no end age, and I actually do know people who entered medical school after 40. I know someone who had a partner that tragically passed away, and he made a career switch and entered medicine after 40 and is now an oncologist. So it is not too old, but things you should consider is during training, those years that Ellen mentioned, it is possible to take off a little bit of time here and here, but kind of when you enter, it's a track. It's very difficult to. I took off a year after medical school, and some people will take off a year here and there, but you can't really interrupt a fellowship or slow down a fellowship or a residency program because of life. So that's one thing that one should consider. Also, certain parts of the training are very hard. And so if you're 40 and you don't think that you can do, Q3 calls, meaning that every third night you stay in the hospital overnight, or if you don't feel that you can give up every weekend or not have your weekends to yourself because you're not used to that, then that might not be a good thing for you. Also, as we progress in our lives, we also have responsibilities to other people, like children, partners, parents. So it becomes less of an individual decision for that. It may be for people who are coming right out of college than for people who are already married and having aging parents or kids that are coming up. It's more of a community decision at some points. But like all things, if you really want to do it, if there's a will, there's a way.
With that, we've reached about an hour, and I want to thank a panelist for really giving some really wonderful and candid views and being very hopefully to the attendees. So with that, what we're going to do is we're going to go into the fluid space. And for those of you in the audience, when we end the stage portion here, you're going to be thrown into the quote lounge. And what you're going to do is once I activate the fluid space, you should then join. There's an option to join the fluid space, and you can be able to talk to Alan and Kathy and Rashad and the other people who join. And similarly for our panelists here, once I put you into the into the backstage, click on the arrow to take you out of the backstage, and then do exactly the same thing as the other attendees. So thank you very much, and let's all enjoy chatting with the other attendees.